Immaculate is the story of Cecilia, played by Sydney Sweeney, a woman of devout faith who feels a calling to something greater, to take up a life of poverty and chastity at a beautiful, picture-perfect Italian countryside convent, where she is joining a large group of nuns who've been there their whole life, who've worked devoutly every day to more closely understand the words and the meaning of God. Sydney Sweeney plays Cecilia. She arrives at this convent, and there she discovers that she feels like she's found a place, that she's where she needs to be. Except something's not right. Something's amiss. She feels funny, and one day she discovers that she's sick. Upon going to see the I guess it's the doctor of the convent. Yes, convent doctor.
Yeah.
She discovers that she is with child miraculously. And suddenly, she's thrust into the position a la Virgin Mary, right? The second coming of Christ. She becomes a revered figure, despite this horrifying reality that she may have fallen victim to something much darker. And something much more sinister. The movie stars Sydney Sweeney, also stars Alvaro Morte, who did the show Money Heist on Netflix, which I never watched, but he's in a ton of it, and he's pretty good in this movie. And then a good handful of people who I don't know, a lot of really
Italian cast.
Yes, and it's directed by Michael Mohan, who previously has done some Sydney Sweeney projects. They've worked together. He did Everything Sucks over on Netflix. It's a 10-episode series. And he did a movie called The Voyeurs with Sydney Sweeney in 2021. Little Rear Window. She plays a woman who moves across the street from another apartment she can see into. Anyway, Immaculate. It's Catholic horror, right? It's spooky. It's nuns. It's Christianity and religion. Andy, what do you think of Immaculate?
The vibes are immaculate. Pun intended. So a lot of this movie works, and there's a lot of it that kind of doesn't, but the mood, the atmosphere, the vibes overall really put it over the storyline, over the finish line rather, along with a really great performance from Sydney Sweeney, who really carries the film. She does so good of what I call eyeball acting, where she's like barely on the verge of tears, like eyes filled with water. She cries on command. She also does really good like breath work, like I think Jodie Foster in Silence of the Lambs, where she's real like that, like panting around while you're trying to hide.
Yeah.
The story's a little bit cliche. It's filled with a lot of kind of horror tropes, but it's definitely conjuring up images from things like Rosemary's Baby, Mother. I was reminded of Suspiria, about like there's something more going on in this place than we think. It really, her performance really delivers this in the end. She's like at an 8 the whole time, and then at the end she turns it up to like an 11, and I was really kind of blown away by that. Like I said, a lot of it is kind of jump scary and quiet bang, and a lot of kind of tropey things, but the setting works really well. This is an all Italian cast. There's big language barrier that happens pretty much through the first half of the film, where she's just barely learning Italian and moving to this convent, and everyone else, of course, that's her primary language, so she doesn't really understand what's going on half the time, and she's kind of shunned, and it's very much fish out of water. And they're in this old convent that looks 1,000 years old. Stone is chipping, wood's chipping, rotting. Like it really brings you in, and it's filmed well. It's not too long. So overall, I really enjoyed it, even with some of its shortcomings.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to understand about what Immaculate is doing is to understand where it came from. We talked about this in the past when we talked about the trailer, but this film was produced by Sydney Sweeney, right? And she read for this film in 2014. She did an audition for it. Didn't happen. Didn't end up coming together. Somewhere along the way, after she found some success, she managed to go down and track down the script, and functionally acquire the rights to it and produce the film. She partnered with director Michael Mohan, who she'd worked with previously on it. She helped get it going. She helped get the crew together, like all of that. Like this is a thing now in Hollywood. It seems like actors just got to produce their own stuff. It's nuts. And she was a big part of that. And I think that says a lot about what works in Immaculate and what doesn't, because Immaculate feels like a basic script that's been punched up by some good talent. Because there's some good sequences in Immaculate, and there's some good performances in Immaculate, and there's some good body horror and some good ideas. But the script's a little basic, and that's so okay. It's a 90-minute horror feature. It is not supposed to be anything grand. It is not supposed to be anything huge, despite obviously the religious trappings calling it Immaculate. But the idea at the center of it, either everybody else is crazy or I am, right? When you're trapped in this setting, either all the nuns are nuts or I'm nuts. And meanwhile, having to be with child and having the body horror of that happening is unique. And Immaculate in that way, I think, is a lot about suffering. And that's the real scary thing in Immaculate. It's the suffering. There's a lot
Love
of
is suffering
in this movie. Love is suffering, and there's a lot of suffering in Immaculate. And Sydney Sweeney's great at that. Like Andy said, she's got the one tear thing down. There's a great shot of her in the trailer where she's got just like dressed up like the Virgin Mary, and like the camera does this nice long slow zoom out, like 1 point perspective, like real good looking stuff. There's people getting branded and screaming and crying. The whole film opens with this really, really fantastic sequence of a woman trying to escape. That's tragic, and that's good stuff. But it also takes a turn into like gore and body horror that I didn't expect.
Yeah, it gets real nasty.
The trailer features some blood and guts, so I guess I should have thought that going in. But like, it really, man, it hangs on some stuff. It'll show you
Yeah.
something horrifying, and the camera will hang on it for like 6 seconds and just let you stare at the gore before it gets back to the film. Like, didn't see it coming.
Yeah. Again, the vibes carry us across the finish line. There's a lot of scenes walking around at night by candlelight, and they're in this kind of hospice convent where they're taking care of patients on their deathbed. And so, there's creepy nuns who are like, death is in the air here all the time. Death is a daily occurrence. Get used to it. Like they're really mean to her, which
Right.
shows up. But so you got these old creepy nuns. They only speak Italian. She can only kind of piece together most of what they say. One of the existing nuns, kind of who's like in charge, totally takes a disliking to Sister Cecilia, which is Sydney Sweeney's character. She's gets put on the worst duties. She's got this comically small bed. It's like half of a full-size mattress. Like, it's so funny. But it all contributes just to a lot of atmosphere in this sort of like really creepy, secluded place.
I was going to say, regarding the comically small bed, surprisingly decent small laughs in here. Like great move for people who blow air out of the noses. You know what I mean? Like some good stuff for sure. I do like the tone and setting. That's something that's really important in the visuals. The nuns are clad in like all black, right? Like the colors are black and white, baby. Like, and when she first arrives at the convent, she looks like Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music, Maria, right? She's got like the gray skirt, and she's like, oh, everything's good. And she's like clad in the clothes, and the house, like the paint's peeling, and it's like everything's stone and like it's just kind of falling apart, right? Like age has very clearly impacted this place. And she ends up being this character who at the center of that is small, but like determined. I was gonna say not defiant. Like people tell her very early on, you can still get out of here. And she's like, I feel I'm sufficiently prepared for what I'm doing here. Like she genuinely feels a calling by God, which is unique when things take a turn. And this really great reveal sequence when it's kind of discovered that she is with child, and the priests obviously are like, what happened here? How is this possible? Like we need to hear it from you. And she's like, what are you talking about? She doesn't have memories of this. And she starts to see these like really surreal visions of things happening around you. You see a bit in the trailer, like when she's giving confession, the priest starts like inching further and further away from her, like in the frame, and just kind of pushing back out into the darkness, or she starts to have these odd dreams. A lot of that surrealist stuff's a lot of fun. I think it's probably like the best parts of it, because when it comes back down to earth and she's just like working at the convent, you're like, okay, yeah, like daily life, like the dreamy horror stuff. It's good. It's good. Like Andy said, it's vibes, immaculate vibes.
Right. And then again, heavily influenced by things like Rosemary's Baby from the 60s. similar to Suspiria. In Suspiria, Susie Bannion comes from nowhere, USA. She feels called to this dance studio in Germany. We have a similar story here where she's, there's this backstory about how she nearly drowned. She technically died for several minutes and then came back, and she feels called to this convent, this remote convent out in Italy. But while it's kind of full of tropes and a little cliche, there is also kind of this underlying narrative about like a woman with no power eventually kind of gaining agency and taking matters kind of into her own hands, because all these women are kind of subjected to the few men that work at the convent. There's like the head priest who's kind of calling the shots. There is there's like a cardinal or something there. The doctor is also a man. And anytime there's complaints, they just tell her, they're like, no, you're fine, or this is actually what's going. Like, they don't really listen to her a lot. So it's about kind of overcoming these like patriarchal settings.
Yeah, and that's a charming spin, I think, on the format, right? Like something like Suspiria, where you're kind of like helpless damsel is descending into the madness and maybe not aware of it at first. Once she kind of becomes aware, there may be people who help her or try to keep her there. The idea that like nearly the entire convent immediately buys into this, and all of them go with it and dress her up like the Virgin Mary, and they stand up when she walks in the room. Like, there is no escaping like devout belief, like the idea that like everyone goes for what's happening. And I think that's really unique. Like, I don't remember the last time I saw a bottle picture like this where your character's trapped, and like it's not just like, oh, maybe something, maybe it's not true. Like, absolute devout belief, right? Like, that's kind of cool. That's an interesting sharpness to it that I think I hadn't expected going in. Yeah. Oh, also, while I'm thinking about it, good soundtrack. Surprisingly good soundtrack.
Good score.
The composer's name is Tate Bell. Do I have that wrong? I'll look him up real quick. Any other thoughts on this, Andy, for recommendations? I want to make sure I get this guy's name.
I think I'm ready.
His name is IMDb. I'm not signing in, dude. I'm not doing it. I run a movie podcast. I'm not signing in. Oh my God. Anyway, I'll find it in a moment.
Eric Lutz.
Eric Lutz. Who is Tate Bell? I was so far off. Eric Lutz did the music. Go check it out on Spotify. Andy, would you recommend Immaculate?
I would, for horror fans, new and old. Religious horror is no stranger to the horror realm. The story is a little bit cliche, but the setting, the mood, the atmosphere, and Sydney Sweeney's performance really take it over the top. And it's a quick 90 minutes. It's got some good scares, a lot of body horror, a nice little picture. Definitely recommend for horror fans.
Yeah, I'm going to say recommend, but save for streaming, especially come October. Like, there's no reason to rush out to the theater to see this thing unless you are wildly bored and need something to tickle your fancy on the big screen. Like, it's good. It's good. It's solid October flick, I think. But yeah, not anything huge to write home about. Sharp performances. I'm excited to see what this crew does next. And that's Immaculate. Now, Andy, we got to move on to much bigger topics. Upcoming films, right? New things happening in cinema. What do we call this segment?
It's time for the trailer park.